Have you ever heard a house breathe? Not the creaks and groans of settling wood, but a genuine rhythmic inhale and exhale. I hadn't either until I moved into Blackwood Manor. It was an old Victorian, a relic from a time when aesthetics mattered more than practicality. I got it for a steal, a price so low it should have been my first warning. The realtor, a nervous man named Mr. Abernathy, had mumbled something about the house having character. I would soon learn that character was an understatement. The first few nights were deceptively quiet. I busied myself with unpacking, arranging furniture, trying to breathe life into the dusty, forgotten rooms. The silence was heavy, thick, a blanket smothering every sound. It was on the third night that the whispers began. They were faint at first, like the rustle of dry leaves caught in a draft, just on the edge of hearing. I dismissed them as my imagination, the product of an overactive mind in an unfamiliar place. But they grew bolder. Soon they were distinct, weaving through the oppressive silence of the manor. Two female voices. One was soft, almost melodic, a sad lullaby that seemed to weep on the air. The other was sharp, brittle, like snapping twigs, laced with a bitterness that chilled me to the bone. They never spoke words I could understand, just hushed tones and sibilant hisses that slithered through the keyholes and under the doors. One evening, I was in the library, a grand room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I was trying to read, but the whispers were a constant distraction. The soft voice was there, humming its sorrowful tune. Then the sharp voice cut through it. A cold spot formed in the center of the room, so intense it felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The fire in the hearth sputtered, its flames turning a sickly blue before extinguishing completely, plunging the room into near darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled for my phone, its flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom. That's when I saw them. For a fleeting second, silhouetted against the tall window, were two figures. Two women. One was tall and willowy, her form almost translucent, her head bowed as if in perpetual grief. The other was shorter, her posture rigid and angry, a dark, solid shape of pure malice. Then they were gone. I stood there, frozen, the phone trembling in my hand. The cold spot slowly dissipated, and the room returned to its normal temperature, but the silence that followed was more terrifying than the whispers had ever been. I spent the next day in the local town archives, desperate for answers. The librarian, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, seemed to know what I was looking for before I even asked. "Blackwood Manor," she said, her voice dropping. A sad, sad story. She led me to a dusty collection of old newspapers. The headlines told a tragic tale. A century ago, the manor was home to two sisters, Elara and Isolde Blackwood. Elara, the elder, was beautiful and gentle, beloved by all. Isolde, the younger, was described as plain and resentful, living in her sister's shadow. Elara was engaged to a wealthy young man from a neighboring town. Isolde, consumed by jealousy, saw this as the ultimate betrayal. The night before the wedding, a terrible argument erupted between the sisters. The details were murky, but the outcome was not. Elara was found at the bottom of the grand staircase, her neck broken. The official report called it a tragic accident. Isolde, they said, was so overcome with grief that she took her own life in the library a week later. But the town gossip, preserved in faded newsprint, told a different story. They whispered that Isolde had pushed her sister, that the house itself held the echoes of that final, fatal argument. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the manor, a new kind of fear gripping me. I wasn't just dealing with ghosts. I was living in the epicenter of a century-old tragedy. That night, the activity escalated. The whispers were no longer just whispers. They were arguments. Elara's soft, pleading tones were drowned out by Isolde's sharp, venomous accusations. Doors slammed open and shut on their own. Objects would fly off shelves, hurled by an unseen force. Isolde's rage was a physical presence in the house, a tempest of hate. Elara's sorrow was a palpable weight, a suffocating grief that made it hard to breathe. One night, I was woken by the sound of weeping. It was coming from the hallway, right outside my bedroom door. It was Elara's voice, closer and clearer than ever before. I cautiously opened the door and peered out. A shimmering, ethereal form drifted at the top of the grand staircase, the very spot where she had died. She was weeping, her translucent hands covering her face. As I watched, a dark, malevolent shadow coalesced behind her. Isolde. The air crackled with energy. Isolde's sharp whisper cut through the air. You took everything from me. The temperature plummeted. Elara's form flickered. I loved you, she sobbed, her voice a fragile echo. You were my sister. Isolde let out a shriek of pure rage that wasn't human. The shadowy form lunged, and Elara's spirit dissipated with a final heartbreaking sigh, like a candle flame snuffed out. The shadow Isolde turned its attention to me. I couldn't see a face, but I felt its burning hatred fixated on me, the living intruder in her house of pain. She glided towards me, the darkness around her deepening, a vortex of cold and despair. I slammed the bedroom door shut, fumbling with the old iron lock just as a tremendous force hit the other side, shaking the entire frame. The wood splintered. Isolde's hissing voice was right against the door, seeping through the cracks. Get out! I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of my room, listening to her relentless assault on the door. The banging and scratching didn't stop until the first rays of dawn pierced through the window. The moment the sunlight touched the floor, silence fell. Complete, absolute silence. I waited for an hour before I dared to open the door. The hallway was empty. The door was a wreck, covered in deep gouges and splinters. I didn't wait to pack. I grabbed my car keys, my wallet, and my phone, and ran out of that house without a backward glance. I drove until the sun was high in the sky, putting as much distance as I could between myself and Blackwood Manor. I never went back. I left everything I owned in that house. Let the ghosts keep it. Let them play out their tragedy for another 100 years. Some places are stained by the past, and no amount of new paint or new life can cover the darkness that seeps from the very walls. Blackwood Manor doesn't just have character. It has a soul, a broken, vengeful soul that never wants to be disturbed, and I, for one, will never disturb it again. Thanks for listening, and if you have your own stories, I'd love to hear them. Stay safe out there.